So, how are you today, Mr. Parker?
Doing okay.
Are you doing better since the last time we met a couple weeks ago?
Little bit, yeah.
Okay, so the last time we met, we talked about how you were having a reoccurrence of your depression and anxiety. Is that still something you're working through?
Yeah, it's still something I'm dealing with.
Okay. Can you kind of explain to me some of the symptoms that you've had in the last 2 weeks since we last met of your anxiety or depression?
Symptoms as far as, like, what triggers it, or...
Triggers, or a situation that you had that happened that caused your anxiety to flare up?
Okay. Being caught in large crowds.
Where was that?
Kind of tends to do that. Well, it was right around Thanksgiving. I was shopping. I was grocery shopping, and apparently everyone decided to go shopping on that day. Things like that, large crowds, and being late for things, or like stuck in traffic, or just stuck behind people, things like that.
Okay, so it sounds like you had a lot of events that happened that you could utilize with your homework, that you could apply to your homework assignment, right? I know last time we talked about, I introduced you to anxiety, and I think your homework was to come up with ways in which you experience anxiety and kind of like the different symptoms that you experience and ways you can cope. Do you mind to go over one or two of those real quick?
Yeah, I had on here the triggers that we talked about. Like I said, being late for things really bothers me. Being in large crowds, and a lot of times I have trouble sleeping. I end up having really weird nightmares or things like that. So.
Okay, so you had nightmares also.
Yeah, not every night, but it's hit or miss sometimes.
Okay. So what were some of the ways you discover that you cope with your anxiety?
When it's the ways I cope with it, or what happens to me.
According to your worksheet on your homework assignment, what did you say that were ways you could cope with the things you're going through?
Things that I do to cope, I usually try to sit and listen to music. That tends to help. It tends to calm me down and get me kind of focused again. Sometimes I'll sit and I'll just kind of focus on my breathing and just try to kind of block everything else out. A lot of times I'll go to the gym and work out. My buddies are there, and it's half social event, half workout, so it's gets my mind off things.
Multiple benefits than the working out. Okay, well, good. All right, so it sounds like you're kind of getting a better grasp of anxiety, the things that you experience on a personal level, plus you came up, I can see, with different ways that you are able to counteract your bouts of anxiety that you experience, right? Okay. So what we're going to what we're going to go through this week is we're going to talk about how to counteract anxious thinking.
Okay.
So basically, the way this works is we talk about how we have anxiety-producing thoughts. Such an example would be, an anxiety-producing thought would be, I can't face my boss because all she's going to do is yell at me. That is an anxiety-producing thought. You get anxiety from the fact that you're going to have to go talk to your boss. You may not know about what, but the fact that you feel like she's going to yell at me because you might have done something wrong is the issue which causes you anxiety. Therefore, in a way to counteract that anxiety thought, you would then come up with a rational counterstatement. A way of using this example of of having to see your boss would be to say that your boss meets with people all the time and that she doesn't yell at them. So basically, your boss could be meeting with you over something good that you've done.
True.
So instead of going to the immediate negative response, you're trying to think of something positive that could happen as a result, or even neutral. It doesn't even have to be positive. But that would be definitely a more productive thought than the one that creates anxiety. Okay. Does that make sense? Do you understand?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what the thing that you're going to do this week is basically coming up with your own events that would not only produce that, you're also coming up with an anxiety-producing thought, such as you mentioned before, going to the store, being around large crowds. That is a thought. Oh, I'm going to go to the store. It's going to be filled with people. It's going to freak me out. That's kind of an anxiety-producing thought because you're not even there yet. But you're already assuming that it's going to be a bad experience. And that obviously would cause anxiety.
Right.
So what would, based on kind of what we're talking about, what do you think would be a rational counterstatement for that particular situation?
For going somewhere crowded? Maybe it won't be as bad as I think. There won't be as many people there, maybe, as I'm afraid of, or nobody's paying attention to me. They're doing their own thing. They're there with their friends or family. They're in their own little worlds.
Okay, that's very good. That's a good example of a rational counterstatement. Sometimes those are hard to come up with, but I think if you'll do this assignment, when you do it, you'll realize that there's a positive to every kind of anxiety situation that you can find yourself in. Like for me, personally, whenever I know that I have a deadline and I'm getting close to it and I'm not finished with something, I start to panic. I start to freak out. I'm going to do bad at this, even if I put a lot of thought into it. So a rational counterstatement for that kind of situation would be, I've put time and effort into this. It's going to show in my work that I've done. So I don't need to be so focused about not finishing on time or not doing it right. I just need to continue on and do the best job that I can. That way it's not as much of a negative thought that I'm thinking. That way hopefully will decrease, if not eliminate, my anxiety. The thing is, another way would be if you're having trouble is to ask for an extension. So they're two different extremes, but it's coming up with a more rational thought regardless about having to finish my work on time. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Yeah, and I mean, something I read a long time ago that I found kind of interesting is it was a quote that said less than 10% of what we worry about ever comes true. So 90% of what we worry about never even happens. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of neat.
Is that applicable to your life?
It does make me feel better sometimes when I get anxious. I'll think back to that statement, and it kind of helps calm me down. And most often, the experience is not as bad as the anxiety of the experience. So
it's a very good thing you said that.
I worry more about what might happen rather than when it does happen. It's nowhere near as bad.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, well, that's good. That's a good quote. I agree. It's a very good quote. Okay, so for your homework for this week, what I'm gonna have you do, it's called a challenging anxious thoughts worksheet. Basically, what it is you describe a situation that triggers your anxiety, kind of like we just were going over.
Okay.
So, what was one you want to use regarding that you put on your sheet down here?
That triggers anxiety. Being late to places.
Okay, so being late somewhere. So something that triggers your anxiety, you would put here as being late.
Okay.
Let's say you were late to a job. Okay, let's use a job.
Okay.
And then, so what would be the worst outcome of that job?
You get fired.
Okay, so that's the worst outcome.
Yeah.
What would be the best outcome?
Best outcome, nobody cares, nobody notices, or they just give you a verbal warning.
Okay. So what do you think is likely to happen? What is the most likely outcome of that situation?
Most likely when people are late to work, it's no big deal.
Yeah.
It happens to everybody, so they're like, it's whatever.
Especially if you have a rapport of you're usually on time.
Right.
If you're consistently late, obviously it would be a little different.
It's not going to look good,
Yeah. So, basically what I want you to do is fill this out.
Okay.
And use a different situation than the one we just went over.
Okay.
And talk about the worst outcome, the best outcome, and the likely outcome.
Okay.
And then I want you to come down here and say, is it going to matter a week from now, a month from now, or a year from now?
Okay.
And then a part of this worksheet is I want you to be able to identify the rational thought of this situation and the irrational thought.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay. All right. It's good to meet with you. I will see you next time.